The Krell Empire assembled 500 warships for what they called the Purge Fleet. Its mission was simple and brutal: find every human settlement, every station, every ship, and destroy them all. No prisoners, no mercy, no negotiations. They would erase humanity from the galaxy as if they had never existed. Admiral Charles Mitchell had been counting on exactly this response. He stood in the war room aboard the Phoenix with his senior officers gathered around the holographic display. The map showed the Purge Fleet moving toward the outer systems where most human colonies were located. They committed everything to offense, Charles said, pointing to the display. Every major warship, every carrier, every battle group. They're so focused on hunting us that they've left their core systems vulnerable. We're not going to fight the Purge Fleet. We're going to go around them and strike at their homeworld. Captain Paul Henderson leaned forward to study the map. Sir, even if we get past their defenses, we don't have enough firepower to conquer their homeworld. Their planetary shields alone could withstand our entire fleet. Charles smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been planning this exact moment for 30 years. We're not going to conquer it. We're going to threaten it. Everything I've done, every battle we've fought, every move we've made has been to get them to this point. Angry, overcommitted, and with their leadership exposed. We're going to make them choose between letting us go free or losing everything they've built. The plan was dangerous to the point of madness. While the Purge Fleet hunted through the outer systems, the main human battle group would use captured Krell security codes to jump deep into Empire space. They would appear at the Krell homeworld itself and hold it hostage until the Empire agreed to terms. Lieutenant Karen Foster spoke up from her position at the table. It's a one-way trip. Even if we succeed, we'll never make it back out. The Purge Fleet will return and trap us there. I know, Charles replied quietly. That's why I'm only asking for volunteers. Anyone who wants to stay behind and defend our colonies can do so with honor. But I'm going to that homeworld. I'm going to end this war one way or another. He looked around the room at his officers. These were people who had fought beside him for weeks now. People who had trusted his plans even when they seemed impossible. People who had already risked everything for freedom. Every single one of them volunteered. The journey took 2 weeks. The human fleet jumped through Krell space using stolen access codes and forged identification signals. They pretended to be supply convoys, patrol groups, and cargo haulers. The Krell checkpoints let them through without question, because their codes were valid and their transponders broadcast the right signals. The Purge Fleet, busy searching the outer rim for human colonies, never realized their targets had slipped past them. When the human fleet emerged in the Krell home system, they found it defended but not heavily. Most of the Empire's military was out hunting humans. The homeworld had garrison forces and orbital defense platforms, but nothing that could stop a determined assault by warships that had been built specifically for this mission. All ships, commence attack on the orbital defense stations, Charles ordered. Target military installations only. I don't want any civilian casualties. We're not here to commit murder. We're here to make a point. The battle for control of Krell orbital space was fierce but short. The garrison forces fought bravely, but they were facing veterans who had survived multiple battles against superior numbers. The human fleet tore through the defenses with practiced efficiency. Railguns destroyed defense platforms. Missiles knocked out weapon satellites. Plasma cannons disabled garrison ships. Within 3 hours, the human fleet controlled the space above the Krell homeworld. Charles positioned his ships in high orbit over the capital city. He had nuclear weapons aimed at military headquarters, power plants, and government buildings. He had the capability to devastate the planet's infrastructure. But he didn't fire. Instead, he opened a communication channel that broadcast to every screen on the planet. His image appeared in homes, offices, and government buildings. The Krell people, who had never been threatened in their own capital, watched in shock as a human admiral spoke to them from orbit. Members of the Imperial Council, "This is Admiral Charles Mitchell of Earth," he began. His voice was calm and steady. "As you can see, we now control the space above your homeworld. Your Purge Fleet is still 3 days away, hunting for us in the wrong systems. We have weapons aimed at your cities, your infrastructure, your government. We could fire those weapons right now. We could do to you what you plan to do to us." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. On the planet's surface, in the Grand Council chamber, the Krell leadership watched with a mixture of fear and rage. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for 2 centuries. They had conquered dozens of species, and now they were the ones being threatened. "But we're not going to fire," Charles continued. Because unlike you, we don't want genocide. We don't want conquest. We just want to be free. 30 years ago, I tried to surrender to you. I offered peace and cooperation. You rejected that offer and enslaved my entire species. Today, I'm not offering surrender. I'm offering you a choice. The display behind him changed to show human colonies across the galaxy. Withdraw from all human territories. Release every human slave. Recognize our independence and our right to exist. Do this and we leave your homeworld intact. Your civilization continues. Your people live. You just won't have humans as your subjects anymore. The Supreme Commander stood in the council chamber staring at the screen. And if we refuse? If we wait for the Purge fleet to return and destroy you? Charles's expression turned cold. Then we don't destroy your homeworld. We do something worse. We stay here. We show your people that the mighty Krell Empire can be defeated. We become proof that you're not invincible. Every species you've ever conquered will see that humans, broken slaves with no homeworld, brought you to your knees in your own capital. How long do you think your empire survives after that? How many rebellions will start when they see what we've done? He leaned forward, his eyes hard. You can fight us. You can eventually kill us all, but it will cost you everything. Your fleet will be damaged. Your homeworld will be scarred. Your reputation will be destroyed. And every slave in your empire will know that resistance is possible. Is your pride worth that price? The council chamber fell silent. The counselors looked at each other. Years of arrogance and superiority suddenly challenged by cold reality. They had built their empire on fear and overwhelming force. One human admiral had just shown them that fear works both ways. The debate lasted 3 hours. Some counselors wanted to refuse to let the Purge fleet return and destroy the human ships. Others argued for practicality. The humans had proven they could strike anywhere, anytime. They had infiltrated Krell space using stolen codes. They had hidden weapons and ships for 3 decades. Even if the Purge fleet destroyed this battle group, how many more hidden bases did the humans have? How many more secret weapons? In the end, survival instinct won over pride. The council voted to accept Charles's terms. They would release the human slaves. They would recognize human independence. They would withdraw from human space. The alternative was too costly, too risky, and might inspire rebellions across their entire empire. 3 months later, Charles stood on Earth for the first time in 30 years. The planet was damaged, its forests cut down, and its oceans polluted. The Krell had stripped it of resources during their occupation. But it was free now. Humans from across the galaxy were returning home, bringing with them the skills and knowledge they had gained during their enslavement. Governor Susan Blake stood beside him, looking at the sunset over the ruins of what had once been a great city. We actually did it. Against everything, we won. We survived. Charles corrected her gently. That's what humans do. We survive, we adapt, we endure. They tried to break us, but they only made us stronger. That was their fundamental mistake. Paul Henderson approached with news from the fleet. The last transport ships are arriving. All our people are accounted for. The Krell are honoring the treaty, mostly because they're terrified we'll come back if they don't. Charles nodded slowly. He felt his age now, the weight of 73 years and 3 decades of imprisonment. Good, then I can finally rest. 30 years in a cell, 3 months of war. I've earned some peace. Karen Foster landed her fighter nearby and walked over to join them. She still wore her flight suit, unwilling to give up the uniform even though the fighting was done. What happens now, sir? What do we do with peace? The old admiral looked out at Earth, at the scarred but free planet that had been conquered but never truly broken. We rebuild. We remember. We make sure the next generation knows what we fought for. The galaxy thought we were weak because we offered peace first. Let them think that. But now they also know what happens when you push us too far. He turned to face his officers, the people who had trusted him and followed him through an impossible war. We didn't win because we were stronger or smarter than the Krell. We won because we refused to give up. We won because every human, from the lowest maintenance worker to the highest officer, played their part. We won because they underestimated us. They saw Slavi. 3 weeks had passed since the prison station fell. In that time, the human uprising had spread across 17 star systems. The Krell Empire, shocked by the initial attacks, had finally organized its response. Now their full military might was moving, and it was terrifying to behold. Admiral Charles Mitchell stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, the flagship of the renewed Earth Navy. The ship was a masterpiece of engineering, combining salvaged Krell technology with human innovation. It had been built in secret over 15 years in one of the hidden forge stations. The crew was made up of volunteers, men and women who had been waiting their entire lives for this moment. "Jump signatures detected," the sensor officer called out. His name was Danny Wright, and he had spent 20 years working as a technician on Krell ships, learning everything he could about their systems. Krell Task Force entering the system. "I'm counting 200 ships, sir. They brought everything. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, the works." Charles studied the tactical display without any visible concern. He had known this was coming. In fact, he had been planning for it. The Krell were predictable when they were angry. They would commit overwhelming force to crush what they saw as a slave rebellion. That predictability was something he could use. "Execute retreat pattern Delta 7, he ordered calmly. "Make it look good. I want them convinced we're running scared." The human fleet, outnumbered 3-1, began what appeared to be a panicked retreat. Ships turned away from the advancing Krell armada and headed toward the outer system. Their formation looked ragged and disorganized. To the Krell commander watching from his flagship, it looked like the humans had finally realized they couldn't win. "All ships pursue," the Krell commander ordered. "Don't let them escape. We end this rebellion today." On the planet below, the human colony of New Haven watched the battle through telescopes and sensors. These weren't just soldiers fighting up there. These were their sons and daughters, their mothers and fathers. Every human in the galaxy had someone on those ships. Governor Susan Blake stood in the Planetary Defense Center. She had been a slave for 20 years, serving Krell officials and keeping her head down. Now she was the elected leader of a free human colony. She watched the tactical displays with worry, but also with faith. "I know this looks bad," she said to the people gathered around her. "I know it seems like we're losing, but Admiral Mitchell has been planning this war for 30 years. He's never failed when he had time to prepare. Trust our people up there. They know what they're doing." In space, the Krell fleet pushed deeper into the system, chasing the retreating humans. They didn't notice the asteroids drifting in their path. Space was full of rocks and debris. A few asteroids were just background noise. The Krell sensors registered them and dismissed them as unimportant. That was a mistake. Charles watched the Krell fleet reach the exact position he had been waiting for. They were surrounded by asteroids now, hundreds of rocks floating in a loose field. The Krell were so focused on catching the human ships that they didn't stop to wonder why the humans had retreated through this specific region. "Now," Charles said quietly. The asteroids activated. They weren't rocks at all. They were weapons platforms that had been placed here weeks ago, disguised with heat shielding and sensor-dampening fields. Missile batteries, railguns, and plasma cannons all opened fire at the same time. The Krell fleet suddenly found itself taking fire from every direction. The human ships stopped retreating and turned around. Now the Krell were trapped in a kill box with weapons firing at them from above and below and all sides. Ships that had seemed to be running away were now attacking with coordinated precision. "This is impossible," the Krell fleet commander roared. "How many ships do they have? Where did these weapons come from?" Charles's voice came over the communication channels, broadcast so every Krell ship could hear him. "We don't need more ships, Commander. We just needed you to chase us into the trap. You assumed we were running because we were afraid. We were running because we wanted you exactly where you are now." The battle turned into chaos. Krell ships tried to break out of the kill box, but the human fleet was positioned to block every escape route. The hidden weapons platforms kept firing, their computers targeting the largest and most dangerous Krell vessels first. Ships exploded. Debris filled space. The mighty Krell armada that had seemed so unstoppable was being torn apart, but the Krell weren't finished. Their fortress carriers, massive ships that could hold hundreds of fighters, began launching their attack craft. The sky filled with small ships, thousands of them, swarming toward the human fleet like angry insects. Each fighter was fast and deadly, piloted by trained warriors. Captain Paul Henderson commanded one of the human battle groups. He watched the swarm approaching and felt his heart race. This was the moment they had all been worried about. The humans had good ships, but they didn't have enough fighters to match this kind of numbers. "All ships prepare for fighter assault," he ordered. Then he smiled because he knew something the Krell didn't. "Actually, cancel that. It's time to introduce them to the Hornets." Hidden bays opened on the larger human vessels. From concealed hangars in the asteroid belt, new ships emerged. They were small fighters, sleek and fast, painted black to blend with space. The Krell had assumed humans didn't have fighters because they had never seen any. They were wrong. Lieutenant Karen Foster sat in the cockpit of her Hornet fighter, her hands steady on the controls. She had been training for this moment her entire adult life. In secret simulators hidden in the depths of human colonies, she had flown thousands of practice missions. She had studied Krell fighter tactics until she knew them better than the Krell pilots themselves. "Hornet Squadron, this is Foster," she called over the squadron channel. "Break and attack. Remember, they're better trained, but we're more desperate. Use that. Make them afraid." The dogfight that followed was unlike anything the Krell had ever experienced. Human pilots flew with a recklessness that seemed suicidal. They dove through debris fields at full speed. They used destroyed ships as cover. They accepted damage that should have forced them to retreat and kept fighting anyway. Karen lined up behind a Krell fighter and fired. Her plasma cannons hit its engines and the enemy ship spun away. She didn't have time to confirm the kill. 2 more Krell fighters were already on her tail. She pulled her ship into a spiral, diving toward a piece of wreckage. At the last second, she rolled and went under it. The Krell fighters following too close couldn't react in time. One crashed into the debris. The other was forced to break off. "They're insane," a Krell pilot reported to his squadron leader. "They're not fighting to survive. They're fighting to kill us even if it means dying themselves." That was exactly right. Every human pilot knew what was at stake. If they lost this battle, their people would be enslaved forever. That knowledge made them willing to take risks no rational pilot would consider. It made them dangerous in a way the Krell couldn't match. The battle raged for 6 hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed. Thousands of fighters clashed in the space between the fleets. It was brutal and desperate, and neither side would surrender. Finally, the Krell broke. Their commander, watching his fleet being torn apart, ordered a retreat. The surviving ships turned and ran, leaving behind 40 destroyed vessels and hundreds of dead. They jumped out of the system in disorder, their formation broken and their confidence shattered. The human fleet had lost 23 ships. Each one was mourned. Each crew member who died was remembered, but they had held the line. They had faced the Empire's full might and won. Charles addressed his fleet over the communication channels. His voice was tired but steady. "Today we proved something important. We proved we can stand against the Krell Empire's best forces. We proved that we won't be broken again. But this isn't over. They'll come back. They'll bring more ships. They'll try harder. So we rest for now. We repair our ships. We remember our fallen, and we prepare for the next fight." On the Krell homeworld, the Imperial Council met in emergency session. For the first time in 2 centuries, they had suffered a major defeat. Their ships had been outmaneuvered. Their tactics had been anticipated. And worst of all, the slaves they had dismissed as broken had revealed themselves as warriors. "How did we miss this?" one counselor demanded. "We had complete control. We had surveillance. We had spies everywhere." The Supreme Commander, an old Krell who had led their military for 50 years, studied the battle reports. "We missed it because we were arrogant. We assumed that defeating them once meant they would stay defeated. But humans are not like other species. The more you push them down, the harder they push back. We didn't conquer them 30 years ago. We gave them a reason to hate us and then 3 decades to plan their revenge. Then what do? The Supreme Commander's decision was cold and final. We don't try to re-enslave them. We eliminate them. Every human world, every station, every ship. We wipe them out completely. No survivors. No second chances. We make them extinct before they can spread this rebellion to other species." The vote was unanimous. The Krell Empire would commit everything to destroying humanity. It would be a war of annihilation. Charles received word of the Krell decision through intercepted communications. The ships that came out of jump space didn't look impressive. They looked like garbage. Old freighters with rust on their hulls. Mining vessels that should have been scrapped decades ago. Colony transports that barely seemed able to fly. Salvage haulers held together with welds and hope. The Krell defense fleet looked at them and saw easy targets. They saw 200 ships that would be destroyed in minutes. Captain Paul Henderson stood on the bridge of his ship, the Liberty's Dawn. It was registered as a simple cargo freighter. For 20 years it had hauled supplies between Krell stations. Paul had captained it the entire time, smiling at the Krell inspectors who came aboard, accepting their insults with patience, playing the role of a broken human who knew his place. But that was over now. "They're moving to intercept," his tactical officer said. Her name was Betty Cole, and she had been playing the role of a simple navigator for 2 decades. "The Krell fleet is forming an attack pattern. They think we're helpless," Paul smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "Let them think that for a few more seconds. All ships maintain formation. Wait for my signal." The Krell fleet consisted of 30 warships. They were sleek and modern, covered in weapon batteries and armored plating. Their shields could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. Their missiles could track targets across thousands of kilometers. They had won hundreds of battles against dozens of species. As far as they were concerned, this would be over before it started. "Distance closing," Betty reported. 5,000 kilometers. 4,000. 3,000. "Now," Paul said quietly. "Drop the masks." All across the human fleet, panels fell away from the ship's hulls. The rust and damage had been painted on, disguises to make them look helpless. Underneath, the ships were covered in armor plating. Weapon batteries extended from hidden bays. Shield generators powered up with a hum that could be felt through the deck. The pathetic freighters and mining ships suddenly revealed themselves as warships that had been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. The Liberty's dawn shed its disguise like a snake shedding old skin. Railguns extended from concealed ports. Plasma cannons deployed from what had looked like damaged hull sections. Missile tubes opened along the spine of the ship. In seconds, the cargo freighter became a heavy cruiser bristling with weapons. "This is Liberty's dawn to all ships," Paul broadcast across the fleet. "Execute Phoenix Wing formation. Target the command vessels first. Let's show the Krell what humanity built while they weren't looking." The human fleet opened fire as one. Railguns launched projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. Plasma cannons sent superheated bolts across the gap between fleets. Missiles streaked through space, their warheads packed with explosives that had been refined and improved over 3 decades. The Krell had superior technology 30 years ago, but humans had spent those years studying, learning, and building something better. 3 Krell destroyers exploded in the first volley. Their shields, designed to stop the weapons of 30 years ago, couldn't handle what the humans had built. The remaining Krell ships scattered, trying to regroup and return fire, but the human fleet was already moving, executing maneuvers they had practiced in secret simulators hidden in asteroid bases across the galaxy. "Target the flagship," Paul ordered. "Betty, give me a firing solution." "Solution locked, Captain. Firing." The Liberty's dawn shuddered as its main railgun fired. The projectile crossed the space between ships in less than a second. It hit the Krell flagship's shields and punched through like they weren't even there. The ship's hull buckled. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. The flagship tried to turn away, but 2 more human ships hit it with plasma fire. It broke apart in a ball of expanding gas and debris. The battle lasted 20 minutes. The Krell fought well. Their crews were trained and experienced. Their weapons were powerful, but they were facing an enemy that had spent 3 decades preparing for this exact fight. Every human captain knew their target. Every crew had drilled for this moment countless times. More importantly, they were fighting for something the Krell couldn't understand. They were fighting for freedom. Lieutenant Karen Foster led a squadron of small attack craft from a hidden bay in one of the larger ships. Her fighter was sleek and fast, built in secret factories that the Krell didn't know existed. She had trained for this mission her entire adult life, flying simulators and practicing maneuvers when she was supposed to be sleeping. Now it was real. "Hornet Squadron, break and attack," she called over the squadron channel. "Remember your training. Stay mobile. Use the debris for cover. Make every shot count." The Krell had fighters too. They launched from the surviving capital ships, filling space with small attack craft. The pilots were good, graduates of the best military academies in the Empire. But they were fighting humans who had nothing left to lose. Karen and her squadron flew with a recklessness that bordered on insane. They dove through explosions. They used destroyed ships as cover. They took risks that no sane pilot would take. "They're not trying to survive," one Krell pilot reported to his commander. "They're just trying to win, even if it kills them." That was the difference. The Krell pilots had careers and families to go home to. They fought with skill, but also with caution. The human pilots knew that if they lost this battle, their species would be enslaved forever. That knowledge made them fearless. It made them willing to trade their lives for victory if that's what it took. Karen lined up a shot on a Krell interceptor. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt caught the enemy fighter in the engine. It spiraled away, trailing fire. She didn't celebrate. She was already turning toward the next target. On the prison station, Charles coordinated everything from the captured command center. His team had secured it with minimal casualties. The Krell crew, unable to access their own systems and trapped in sealed sections, had surrendered or were hiding. Charles stood at the main tactical display, watching the battle unfold in space around the station. "Admiral, we're receiving hails from Krell Command," Linda Hayes reported. She had made it to the command center and was now running the communication systems. "They want to negotiate." "Tell them that negotiations ended 30 years ago," Charles replied without hesitation. "When they rejected our offer of peace, they made their choice. Now they live with it." Jack Cooper looked up from his station. "Sir, the fleet has broken through the Krell outer defense grid. We have control of the jump gates. We're getting reports from other systems too. The uprising on New Washington is succeeding. The hidden forge stations are coming online. We're hitting them everywhere at once, just like you planned." Charles nodded. The hidden forge stations were his proudest achievement. They were deep space construction facilities disguised as asteroid mining operations. For 30 years, humans had been building ships there. Not many ships because resources were limited and secrecy was essential, but they had built enough. They had focused on quality over quantity, on ships that could match or exceed Krell technology. Status on civilian evacuations? 92% complete, sir. All human prisoners and workers on this station are being moved to the transport ships. We'll have everyone off in another 30 minutes. Good. Once they're safe, we can focus on the next phase. Commander Vexlar watched from his cell in the brig. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now the prisoner, locked in the same type of cell that had held Charles for 30 years. Through a view screen, he could see the battle. His fleet, the pride of this sector, was being systematically destroyed by ships that shouldn't exist. "How?" he asked the empty air. "How did we miss this? We had spies. We had surveillance. We controlled every shipyard and factory." A human guard stood nearby. Her name was Kate Morrison, and she had worked on this station for 5 years as a maintenance worker. She had cleaned Krell quarters and repaired their equipment, while they treated her like she was invisible. Now she wore a combat uniform and carried a plasma rifle. "You missed it because you didn't think we were worth watching carefully," Kate said. "You saw slaves. You saw broken people who had accepted defeat. You never saw soldiers waiting for orders. That freighter captain out there destroying your fleet, he collected garbage on your homeworld for 20 years. The woman running your communication systems, she cleaned toilets. The engineer who shut down your defensive grid, he fixed your air recyclers and smiled while you insulted him. We were always here. We were always ready. You just didn't notice us." The last Krell battlecruiser tried to escape. It turned away from the fight and started charging its jump drive. But 3 human ships intercepted it. Their combined fire overwhelmed its shields. The battlecruiser broke apart, its debris joining the wreckage of its fleet. Paul Henderson leaned back in his captain's chair and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had won. Against everything, they had actually won this battle. But he knew this was just the beginning. The Krell Empire was vast. They had only struck at one small corner of it. "All ships form up for the next jump," he ordered. "We have 17 more targets to hit before the day is over. No rest, no celebration yet. We keep moving until every human is free." His crew acknowledged the order without complaint. They were tired but determined. Charles moved through the dark corridors with confidence. He had memorized every turn, every door, every emergency exit in the station over the last 30 years. The backup lights were dim and red, meant only to provide minimum visibility during emergencies. For him, it was perfect. He could see where he was going, but the security cameras were having trouble tracking him through the chaos. Behind him, he could hear Vexlar shouting orders. Guards were running in every direction, trying to restore order, but they were too late. The moment Charles had pressed that button, everything had changed. Not just on this station, but across the entire galaxy. In the engineering section, 2 humans were working at their normal stations. Their names were Jack Cooper and Linda Hayes. To anyone watching, they were just maintenance workers. Jack cleaned the cooling systems and repaired broken conduits. Linda monitored the power flow and fixed electrical problems. They had been doing these jobs for 15 years. They wore simple gray uniforms. They kept their heads down. They never complained. The Krell guards barely noticed them anymore. But the moment the lights went out, both of them moved. Jack pulled a small device from inside his boot and attached it to the main power control panel. Linda's hands flew across her workstation, entering commands she had memorized years ago. Within seconds, they had locked out the command center's access to critical systems. The Krell officers up there could see what was happening, but they couldn't stop it. "Phoenix Protocol is active," Jack said into a tiny communicator hidden in his collar. "All human personnel, move to your assigned positions now." Throughout the massive station, the same scene repeated itself. Janitors stopped mopping floors and started opening hidden weapons caches. Kitchen workers abandoned their cooking and began sabotaging life support systems in Krell-only sections. Medical staff locked down the hospital bay and secured the human patients inside. Cargo handlers took control of the hangar bays. Every single human on the station, all 237 of them, had been waiting for this moment. They had trained in secret. They had hidden weapons and tools in places the Krell never thought to look. They had memorized plans and procedures. For 15 years, some of them had been preparing. And now, finally, they could stop pretending to be weak. Charles reached his first destination, an armory on level 9. The door should have been locked with 3 different security systems. But when he placed his hand on the panel, it opened immediately. Inside, he found something that made him stop and smile. It was a real smile this time, not the cold, tactical expression from before. This was the smile of a man seeing old friends after a long absence. His uniform hung on a rack in the corner. It was pressed and clean, the dark blue fabric spotless. The insignia of Earth Navy was still bright on the shoulders. Someone had been taking care of it all these years, maintaining it, keeping it ready. Next to it were weapons. Human weapons. Plasma rifles that shouldn't exist anymore. Shock grenades that were supposed to have been destroyed. And there, sitting in a case by itself, was his personal sidearm, a modified railgun pistol that he had carried through the entire Earth-Krell War. "You kept them," he whispered to the empty room. "All these years you kept them ready for me." He changed quickly, stripping off the prison tunic and putting on his uniform. It still fit, though he had lost weight during his imprisonment. The feel of it was familiar and comforting. He strapped on the weapons belt, checked the railgun pistol, and loaded it with a fresh magazine. Then he picked up one of the plasma rifles and headed back out into the corridor. Vexlar burst into the command center with his weapon drawn. The room was chaos. Officers were shouting. Holographic displays showed red warnings everywhere. Security feeds were cutting in and out. Half the station's systems were offline or locked out. "Report," Vexlar roared. How did one old human escape from a maximum security cell? The operations officer, an insectoid creature named Clicktar, was frantically working at his station. His 6 arms moved across multiple control panels at once. "Sir, it's not just the prisoner. We have reports of coordinated attacks across all decks. Containment fields are failing throughout the station. Airlocks are being sealed remotely, powers being rerouted, and we're detecting unauthorized transmissions from our own communication array. Cut off those transmissions immediately." "I can't, sir. They've locked us out of the primary communication systems. I'm trying to regain access, but whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Another officer called out from across the room. "Sir, we've lost contact with the engineering section. All personnel there are not responding. Send a security team." "I can't, sir. The security doors are locked. We can't override them." Vexlar slammed his fist down on a console. The metal dented under the impact. This was impossible. One prisoner couldn't do all of this. One old human shouldn't have been able to cause this much damage. But as he looked at the displays showing the chaos spreading through his station, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't the work of one person. This was coordinated. This was planned. And that meant every human on this station had been working together, waiting for this exact moment. Every screen in the command center suddenly changed. They all showed the same image. Charles Mitchell stood in what looked like the main communication hub. He was wearing his Earth Navy uniform now. Behind him, a dozen armed humans stood in defensive positions. They all looked calm, professional, and ready for a fight. "Greetings, Krell Empire," Charles began. His voice was calm and measured, the voice of someone who had done this many times before. "My name is Admiral Charles Mitchell of Earth. For 30 years you have kept me as a prisoner. You displayed me as a trophy, a symbol of your victory over humanity. You used me to show the galaxy that the Krell Empire cannot be defeated. You weren't entirely wrong. You did defeat us 30 years ago. You did scatter our people across the stars, but you made one critical mistake. He paused, and the camera view expanded to show images from across the galaxy. Humans were rising up on dozens of worlds. Ships that looked like old cargo haulers were dropping their disguises to reveal weapons. Hidden bases were coming online. Everywhere, humans who had been pretending to be broken slaves were showing their true nature. You assumed that because we stopped fighting, we had given up. Charles continued. You thought that because we accepted our slavery, we had forgotten how to resist. But we didn't forget. We waited. Every human you forced to work became a spy gathering information. Every world you sent us to became a potential base of operations. Every ship we repaired, we modified with hidden systems. Every station we maintained, we compromised with backdoor access codes. For 30 years, we have been preparing for this exact moment. Vexillar watched in horror as the images showed the scale of what was happening. This wasn't just an escape. This wasn't just a prison break. This was a coordinated uprising across multiple star systems. I tried to surrender 30 years ago, Charles said, and now his voice had an edge of steel in it. I tried to negotiate peace. I tried to spare lives on both sides. You rejected my offer. You took my surrender and used it to enslave my entire species. You made me watch while you scattered my people across the galaxy. You made me into a joke, a trophy to display to your cadets. That was your mistake, Commander Vexillar. You should have killed me. Because now I'm not surrendering. I'm not asking for negotiations. I'm not begging for mercy. He stepped closer to the camera. His eyes were hard and cold. I'm declaring war, and this time we're not fighting to survive. We're not fighting to negotiate. We're fighting to win. We're fighting to free every human in this galaxy. And we're going to use every trick, every tactic, every weapon we've spent 3 decades preparing. You taught us that overwhelming force wins wars. Now we're going to teach you what happens when you give desperate people 30 years to plan their revenge. The transmission ended. The screens went back to showing the chaos on the station. In the sudden silence, Clicktar's voice was quiet and frightened. Sir, we're detecting multiple jump signatures. Ships are entering this system. I count over 200 vessels. Identification? The officer's antenna drooped low, a sign of extreme distress in his species. They're broadcasting Earth Navy authorization codes, sir. The codes from 30 years ago. The fleet we thought we destroyed is back. Vexillar stared at the tactical display showing the approaching ships. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. This was impossible. The human fleet had been destroyed. Earth's shipyards had been dismantled. Their species had been broken and scattered. But somehow, impossibly, they had rebuilt. They had hidden ships and weapons right under the Krell Empire's nose for 3 decades. And now they were coming. The detention block hummed with a low sound that never stopped. It had been humming for 30 years now, and the old man sitting inside the transparent cell had learned to ignore it long ago. His name was Charles Mitchell, and he was 73 years old. His hair had gone completely gray, tied back in a simple knot behind his head. His face showed every year of his imprisonment, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes were still sharp, still alert, still watching everything. The cell was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. One corner had a basic sleeping mat. Another corner had a simple toilet and sink. The rest was empty space where Charles spent his days sitting cross-legged on the floor. To anyone watching, he looked like a broken old man who had given up on life. That was exactly what he wanted them to think. Commander Vexillar walked down the corridor with 6 young cadets following behind him. He was tall, maybe 8 feet, with green scales that reflected the harsh lights of the detention block. His species, the Krell, had ruled this part of the galaxy for 200 years. They were strong, they were smart, and they believed they were better than every other species in space. 30 years ago, they had proven it by defeating humanity in a war that lasted only 3 months. Vexillar stopped in front of Charles's cell and tapped on the transparent barrier with one clawed finger. The sound was meant to be insulting, like tapping on a fish tank. Charles didn't move. He kept his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. This creature is what remains of humanity's greatest warrior, Vexillar said to his students. His voice came out as a hiss, his forked tongue flickering between his teeth. His name is Charles Mitchell. 30 years ago, he commanded Earth's entire military fleet. Now look at him. He sits on the floor like a pet animal. He meditates. He does nothing. He is broken. The 6 cadets laughed. They were young, probably only 20 years old in human terms. They had never known a time when the Krell Empire wasn't powerful. They had been raised on stories of how the mighty Krell had crushed the humans in battle. To them, Charles was just a museum display, a trophy from a war their parents had won. "Does he ever do anything interesting?" one cadet asked. She was shorter than Vexlar, with blue scales instead of green. "Not anymore," Vexlar replied. "For the first 10 years he tried to escape. 17 times he managed to break out of his cell. 17 times we caught him within hours. Then he stopped trying. He accepted his place. He accepted that the Krell Empire is superior to his pathetic species." Charles opened his eyes. The movement was slow and deliberate. He turned his head to look at Vexlar and the cadets. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood up. His movements were smooth and easy, showing none of the stiffness you might expect from a man his age who had been sitting on a hard floor for hours. He walked to the barrier and stopped just inches from it. His hands were clasped behind his back, the posture of a military officer even after 3 decades of imprisonment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Tell me something, Commander," Charles said. "Do you know why I stopped trying to escape 5 years ago?" Vexlar's eyes narrowed. The human rarely spoke these days. In the last 5 years, Charles had maybe said 100 words total. Most days he didn't even acknowledge when guards brought him food. "You stopped because you finally learned your place," Vexlar said. "You realize that resistance is pointless. The Krell Empire has already won." Charles smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was real. "No," he said. "I stopped because I finally finished." "Finished what, old man?" "Counting," Charles said simply. Vexlar moved closer to the barrier. Behind him, the cadets had stopped laughing. There was something in the human's voice that made them uncomfortable, though they couldn't say exactly what. "Counting what?" Vexlar demanded. "Your ships," Charles said. "Your stations. Your patrol routes. Your guard shift changes. Your supply lines. Your communication frequencies. Your security protocols. Your weaknesses." He paused and his smile grew wider. "Did you think I was just sitting here meditating all these years? I was watching. I was listening. I was learning. Every guard who walked past my cell, I memorized their schedule. Every supply ship that docked at this station, I memorized when it arrived and when it left. Every conversation in this corridor, I listened and remembered." The commander's laugh was harsh and loud. "So what if you counted? You are alone, human. Your species is scattered across 100 worlds working as slaves and servants. Earth is a dead world, stripped of all resources and left as a monument to our victory. You have no fleet. You have no weapons. You have nothing." Charles reached into his simple gray prison tunic. The movement made all the guards tense, their hands moving to their weapons. But the barrier was still active, still keeping Charles trapped inside. He pulled out something small, no bigger than a coin. It was flat and round and had a single button on its surface. "I have this," Charles said. He pressed his thumb down on the button. Nothing happened in the detention block. The lights stayed on. The barrier stayed active. Vexlar relaxed slightly, thinking this was just another sign that the old human had finally lost his mind. But across the galaxy, on 73 different worlds, something did happen. Small devices that had been hidden for years suddenly activated. They sent out signals, coded messages that had been waiting 30 years to be transmitted. In underground bunkers that the Krell didn't know existed, lights flickered to life. In secret factories hidden inside asteroid mines, machines started running. In disguised ships that looked like broken derelicts floating in space, engines began to power up. And in cities and stations across Krell space, thousands of humans received a message on hidden communicators they had carried for years. The message was simple, just 3 words. But those 3 words changed everything. Phoenix Protocol active. On the prison station, every light went dark. The backup generators were supposed to kick in immediately. They were designed to activate in less than 1 second if the main power failed. But 1 second in the dark was enough. When the lights came back on 3 seconds later, Vexlar stared at the cell in shock. Charles Mitchell was gone. The containment barrier was offline. The control panel next to the cell showed that someone had entered a command code, a master override that should have been impossible to access. The cell door stood open, and the old man who had been a prisoner for 30 years was nowhere to be seen. Impossible, Vexlar breathed. The security systems are unbreakable. They were designed by our best engineers. Charles's voice came through the station's communication system, speaking from somewhere else on the massive structure. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through every corridor and every room. Your best engineers learned from the generation before them, Charles said. And that generation learned from the one before that. But do you know who designed half the systems on this station 30 years ago? We did. Humans. When we first made contact with the Krell, we shared our technology. We helped you build things. We taught you how our computers worked. And we left ourselves some back doors just in case we ever needed them. Vexlar drew his weapon and ran toward the command center. The cadets forgotten behind him. Alarms were screaming now, loud and urgent. Red lights flashed in the corridors. His communicator buzzed with reports from all over the station. Containment fields were failing. Security doors were locking down randomly. The communication system was broadcasting on all frequencies. And somewhere on this station, a 73-year-old man who was supposed to be broken and defeated was free, and he was just getting started.